I wanna be kissed by you, just you, nobody else but you.
She once stood under the brightest lights, draped in diamonds, and whispered desires. But when her lifeless body was found on August 5th, 1962, the world didn't just lose a movie star, it inherited a mystery that refuses to die. Officially, Marilyn Monroe died of a drug overdose. But unofficially, the whispers never stopped. Why was her house scrubbed clean before police arrived? Why did her phone records vanish? And why were two of the most powerful men in America, President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, both rumored to have been with her in the final months of her life? This wasn't just a tragedy. It was the silencing of a woman who, for all her beauty and fame, may have known too much. About politics, about secrets, about power. In the weeks before her death, Marilyn had threatened to go public about the men who used her and the secrets they told her in bed. She kept a little red diary, they say, a diary that vanished the night she died. Hollywood played its part, of course. It always does. But this time, the curtain didn't fall with applause. It fell with a phone call to the morgue and a lifetime of questions. She sang "Happy Birthday" in a breathy voice to the most powerful man in the world, and months later, she was dead. Coincidence, or a cover-up wrapped in satin sheets and presidential smiles? In post-war America, the 1950s were painted in pastels and promises. The nation was booming, television was king, and Hollywood was a dream machine spinning illusions for a hungry public. In the middle of this golden haze stood one woman, Marilyn Monroe. More than an actress, she was a phenomenon. She wasn't just desired, she was manufactured desire itself. Blonde, breathless, and branded as the ultimate fantasy, Marilyn was the product of both the studio system and a country obsessed with image. Yet behind the platinum curls and sultry smile lay a deeply fragile woman, born Norma Jean Mortensen, who spent her early life bouncing between foster homes, carrying the emotional scars of abandonment and abuse. By the mid-1950s, she had become one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The 7-Year Itch solidified her place as America's sweetheart. But fame came with a price: emotional instability, studio exploitation, and a public that demanded more than she could give. She struggled with anxiety, insomnia, and a growing dependency on barbiturates, fueled by the pressure to remain flawless at all times. At the same time, the United States was entering an age of shadow wars and Cold War paranoia. The Kennedys, John and Robert, were rising political stars, symbols of a new American ideal: young, handsome, charismatic. But behind their polished images were tangled webs of political maneuvering, personal indiscretions, and dangerous associations. It was within this combustible mix of sex, power, and secrecy that Monroe found herself entangled, not as a puppet, but as a woman who knew too much and loved too recklessly. The alleged affairs between Marilyn Monroe and both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy were never confirmed publicly, but they were never convincingly denied either. And it was precisely that ambiguity that kept the rumors alive, fanned by whispers in smoky hotel rooms and back channels of political gossip. At first, her connection to the Kennedys seemed almost cinematic: the blonde bombshell and the golden boy president. But beneath the glamour was a much darker truth: a triangle of secrets, manipulation, and betrayal. Marilyn, who had been used to being discarded by men, was once again abandoned. Only this time, the consequences were fatal. By 1962, she had been fired from her latest film, Something's Got to Give. Her mental health was deteriorating, and her relationships with powerful men had begun to unravel. Friends described her as paranoid, increasingly convinced she was being watched, her phone tapped. She told confidants she had damning information and was thinking of going public. That summer, she reportedly made numerous attempts to contact the White House. She was no longer a glamorous affair. They considered her a liability. And then she was gone. The death of Marilyn Monroe would become one of the most hotly debated mysteries in American history. Because it wasn't just about a woman found dead in her bedroom. It was about what she knew and who needed her silenced. A symbol of beauty became a symbol of something much darker: a warning, a tragedy, a secret sealed behind closed doors. Before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean, a shy girl with crooked teeth and big dreams. Born in 1926 to a mother plagued by mental illness and a father she never knew, Norma Jean spent her youth in a series of foster homes and orphanages. Her childhood was not gilded. It was fractured, unstable, and profoundly lonely. But Norma Jean had something rare: a face the camera loved and an ability to transform pain into allure. She married young at 16, mostly to escape the foster system. When her husband was shipped off to war, she took a job at a munitions factory, where a military photographer first noticed her. That single photo launched her modeling career and the slow erasure of Norma Jean. By 1946, she had signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, dyed her hair platinum, and changed her name to Marilyn Monroe. The studio molded her into a new creation, one that giggled, flirted, and never questioned her place. She was given minor roles at first, often as the dumb blonde, but even in small parts, she glowed. Then came her breakout in Niagara, 1953, followed by Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire. With every role, she wasn't just acting, she was ascending. Moviegoers were entranced by her mix of innocence and sexuality, and the press couldn't get enough of her. Her image was everywhere: magazines, calendars, no fantasies. But success didn't mean stability. Behind the scenes, Monroe was struggling. The studio system treated her like property, controlled her weight, her appearances, her interviews. She was often late to set, gripped by anxiety and fear of failure. She began taking sleeping pills and barbiturates just to function. Fame for Marilyn was both dream and prison. Still, she fought for control. She formed her own production company in 1955, demanding better roles and more creative authority. It was a bold move for a woman at the time, and especially for someone constantly underestimated for her intellect. Marilyn read philosophy, wrote poetry, and studied method acting with Lee Strasberg in New York. She wanted to be taken seriously, not just stared at. But the industry, and the men who ran it, weren't ready for a thinking blonde. Her personal life was no less chaotic. Her marriage to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio ended in violence and jealousy. Her next marriage to playwright Arthur Miller seemed more promising. Finally, someone who saw her mind. But that too unraveled. Marilyn longed for love, but often chose men who admired her beauty and feared her complexity. As her emotional health declined, so did her reliability. She was difficult on set, sometimes incoherent, other times radiant. Hollywood, once obsessed with her glow, began to grow tired of her fragility. By the early 1960s, she had become both icon and liability. And then, the Kennedys. No one knows exactly when Marilyn met John F. Kennedy. Some say it was at a party hosted by actor Peter Lawford, JFK's brother-in-law. Others trace it to political fundraisers where Monroe was the guest of honor. Regardless, what followed was a whirlwind of secret meetings, phone calls, and growing attachment, on her part, at least. She was infatuated with him. To her, he wasn't just the president. He was a man who made her feel wanted and important. But to him, she was a liability, a beautiful distraction in a life already crowded with secrets. It didn't stop there. Whispers say she was also involved with Robert Kennedy. Some say he tried to end things cleanly. Others believe he tried to silence her. In the final months of her life, Monroe became increasingly erratic. She spoke of betrayal, of men in suits following her, of secrets she could ruin careers with. She told close friends she was writing everything down. "If anything happens to me," she reportedly said, "look in the diary." She was fired from Something's Got to Give in June 1962, after repeated absences and clashes with studio executives. But just weeks later, Fox rehired her. She had posed nude for photographer Bert Stern in what would become her last photo shoot. In every image, she looked like a ghost of herself, still luminous but distant, fading. Her last public appearance was on May 19, 1962, when she sang "Happy Birthday" to President Kennedy at Madison Square Garden. Dressed in a skin-tight, flesh-colored gown sewn with rhinestones, she looked like a living diamond. The crowd roared. But the moment felt like a goodbye. 3 months later, she was found dead. And the story the world thought it knew began to unravel. The morning of August 5, 1962, the world awoke to headlines that Marilyn Monroe had been found dead in her Brentwood home. Official reports claimed it was a suicide, a self-inflicted overdose of barbiturates. But almost immediately, inconsistencies began to bleed through the official narrative like ink through cheap paper. The first oddity was timing. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, claimed she found the door locked late at night, saw light under the door, and called Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. He arrived, broke a window, and found her lifeless body. Yet the timeline shifted in every retelling. Murray's account changed under questioning, and for years, she gave contradictory interviews. In one taped conversation decades later, she quietly said, "Why at my age do I still have to cover this thing?" Then came the missing evidence. Monroe's phone records for the last day of her life disappeared. The so-called red diary she reportedly kept, filled with personal notes and whispered secrets about world leaders, was never found. Her home was suspiciously tidy for someone who had overdosed in panic or despair. There was no water glass in the room to swallow over 40 pills. No vomit. Nothing on the bedsheets. Multiple neighbors reported seeing Robert Kennedy at the Monroe residence the day she died. The FBI denied it. So did the Kennedy family. But retired LAPD officers and journalists later revealed that several calls placed to Robert Kennedy's location were erased from the call logs. Peter Lawford, JFK's brother-in-law and a close friend of Monroe, reportedly made panicked calls to confidants that night, saying, "Marilyn is dying. I can't do anything about it." It was a web of fear, silence, and sudden disappearance. In the 1980s, former CIA and FBI agents admitted in off-record interviews that Monroe was under surveillance. Why? Because she was allegedly privy to pillow talk that crossed into dangerous political territory, plans about Cuba, the mafia, even nuclear weapons. The Kennedys had enemies, and Monroe had become a vulnerability. One former agent claimed she was told things she shouldn't have known. She started asking questions. Some believe Monroe threatened to hold a press conference and expose everything. In the days leading up to her death, she had reportedly told her close friend and publicist, Pat Newcomb, that she was done being used and that she wanted the truth to come out. That same publicist refused to speak to the press for decades afterward. Conspiracy theorists pointed fingers in every direction: the CIA, the mob, the Kennedys, even Dr. Greenson himself. One particularly chilling theory posited that Monroe had been administered a fatal dose via enema. Quiet, quick, and impossible to trace at the time. The official autopsy listed no needle marks, but it also failed to consider alternate means of drug delivery. But the most haunting part wasn't the mechanics of her death. It was how quickly everyone involved closed ranks. Within hours, Monroe's house was cleaned. Her diaries and personal notes vanished. Witnesses retracted statements. And those who knew her best fell silent. The public reaction was a cocktail of grief and suspicion. Newspapers printed sanitized obituaries, but fans and insiders whispered darker truths. Was this really the sad end of a troubled starlet, or a calculated silencing of someone who knew too much? In later years, dozens of books, documentaries, and confessions emerged. Each added another layer of fog instead of clarity. From Norman Mailer to Anthony Summers, researchers tried to piece together what really happened. But the deeper they dug, the more tangled it became. Even the coroner, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, nicknamed the coroner to the stars, would later say he believed the case was mishandled. He admitted the autopsy was incomplete and political pressure had influenced the investigation. Perhaps the most emotional weight lies not in how she died, but in why she died alone, surrounded by people, yet abandoned when she needed truth most. Marilyn Monroe became the ultimate American myth, the dream girl who died dreaming. And her death, more than her life, revealed the savage machinery behind the fame, where sex, politics, and power collide without mercy. In the end, she was reduced to a headline. But the questions never stopped echoing. Why did she die that night? And who needed her gone so badly that the world would never know the full truth? Marilyn Monroe's life reads like a script written by the gods of fame and destruction, a woman elevated to myth only to be consumed by the very forces that made her. At Legends and Secrets, we don't see her merely as a tragic icon or another casualty of Hollywood's unforgiving glare. We see her as a lightning rod, someone who stood at the electrified intersection of beauty, power, and secrecy. To call her a victim would be too easy. Marilyn was intelligent, self-aware, and more complex than the persona she projected. She read Dostoevsky, studied with Strasberg, and fought to reclaim control over her career in a time when women were expected to stay silent and smile. But the world didn't want a thinking Monroe. It wanted a perfect one. And when she failed to stay inside the lines, they erased her. Her involvement with the Kennedy brothers, though never officially confirmed, reveals the blurred line between Hollywood and Washington. The alleged affairs weren't just gossip fodder, they were emblematic of how power sees beauty as disposable. If the rumors are true, Monroe became a liability, not because she did anything wrong, but because she knew too much. And in a world governed by secrets, knowledge can be fatal. What makes Marilyn's story enduring isn't just her glamour or her tragic ending. It's the way her death serves as a mirror. A mirror held up to an America that worships fame, then turns away when fame becomes inconvenient. A mirror reflecting how the powerful protect themselves, even if it means leaving someone lifeless on a cold bed, alone and silenced. We believe the real Marilyn never had a chance to fully emerge. She was sculpted, reshaped, discarded, and mourned, yet rarely understood. And that's perhaps the most brutal irony of all. A woman known by everyone, truly known by no one. To this day, her face sells posters, perfumes, and glossy magazine spreads. But her truth, it remains hidden in shadows, buried beneath decades of speculation, classified documents, and whispered confessions. Maybe she did threaten to speak out, maybe she never intended to, but someone made sure she wouldn't get the chance. And so we ask you, who was Marilyn Monroe to you? A symbol of desire? A lost soul? A martyr of fame and politics? Or was she something even greater, an accidental revolutionary whose mere existence challenged the systems that tried to break her? Your thoughts matter, because the story of Marilyn Monroe isn't finished. It continues with every conversation, every question, every refusal to accept the official narrative at face value. We don't claim to have the final answer, but we believe that somewhere in the silence she left behind, the truth is still whispering. And maybe, just maybe, if we listen close enough, we'll hear it. She once lit up the silver screen with a smile that made the world stop. Her voice, airy and soft, felt like silk brushing against glass. And yet, it was never enough. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just a woman. She was a projection, a performance, a fragile dream caught between fame and loneliness. Long after her death, we still chase the echo she left behind. You can still see her face in Times Square, framed by neon. Her silhouette dances on calendars, coffee mugs, street murals. But behind those iconic images lies something more haunting. The ache of a life spent performing for a world that only wanted the surface. There's something deeply American about her story. The orphan who became a goddess, the outsider who became everyone's fantasy, the woman who had everything and nothing at all. Her tragedy is stitched into the fabric of celebrity culture, repeated endlessly in new forms. We've seen it in others since, names like Judy, Whitney, Britney, each one a variation on the same quiet scream, see me, know me, don't just want me. Marilyn never got to tell her version. Whatever secrets she carried about the Kennedys, about herself, about what it cost to be worshipped, went with her into the dark. And maybe that's why her story endures. Not because we know it, but because we never truly will. She once said, "I don't want to be rich, I just want to be wonderful." And she was, but it wasn't enough to save her. Today, as the world still spins and the headlines keep changing, Marilyn Monroe remains frozen in time, forever 36, forever mysterious, forever on the edge of being understood. Some stories are never fully told, but now you know a little more. And maybe that's what she always wanted, to be more than an image, to be remembered, not just as Marilyn, but as a woman who burned too bright for the room,